Why does everyone keep telling me that?
2 years ago, I made a video about superhero movies and why I'm getting tired of them. With all this speculation about superhero fatigue and when audiences are going to turn on the subgenre like the westerns of old, I thought that it might be a fun experiment to go through every superhero movie from the previous year to document any noteworthy exceptions to discuss and see if these films are improving or are heading towards the toilet bowl. I figure if you guys enjoy this video, then it's something I can revisit around this time every year. It's not like I'm going to be short of content to talk about. In all honesty, I think 2017 was probably the best year for these kind of movies since 2014. But that's not to say there ain't some stinkers. So I'm going to go through this list in order of DC, Marvel, and then the one X-Men movie. The timestamp for each separate film can be seen on screen now or in the description below, just in case there are any you don't want spoiled or just are not interested in. And I expect I will be spoiling some of them, so don't say I didn't warn you. Right, so let's don our capes and get into this. DC, Justice League. Good God, what a mess.
We might not have thought this through.
Justice League proved to me that the DC EU, that rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, really has no hope whatsoever. Like, I'm sorry DC fans, but it's hopeless. You know, I like Batman and Superman too, but come on guys. Through sheer incompetence and lack of vision, Justice League is the second most expensive movie of all time. And we as the audience don't really get to see where any of that money went, because all we're left with is a bland, hilariously subpar movie that offers not a single interesting element of note. There's no secret that the film had a nightmarish production, with constant studio interference to make it feel more like its competition, and a tragedy tearing its original director away only to be replaced by someone whose vision clearly does not align with what was originally shot. I don't think I've ever seen such a Frankenstein's monster of a film. I'd be more upset by it if it wasn't so comically fascinating in how appalling it is. At times it comes across as so amateur and poorly made that it feels more like a bad TV movie than a professionally funded and produced studio film. Say whatever you want about the Snyder films before this, but at least the miserable dark tone was somewhat consistent and offered something different to what the opposition brings to the table. Because without that, all you're left with is a film that is trying to ride off the success of someone else's business model, without any of the planning or base character development, and even then not even doing a good job of aping it. They keep showing this epic Justice League lineup as if it's impressive or something, but realistically, we only know 2 of them in any sort of detail because everything is so rushed. The film is so brisk that it's kind of over before it ever really begins, hastily glossing over anything that could be interesting in fear of going over the 2-hour running time that the producers forced it to be. Personally, I actually prefer the characters in the Justice League over the ones in the Avengers. Well, I used to anyway. But this film really highlights the fact that simply owning the rights to a popular and valuable character isn't enough on its own. Marvel has meticulously built up some genuinely interesting characters over a very large amount of time, so when we see them come together, it's extremely satisfying and exciting. Justice League shows us nothing new except how to not make a superhero movie. I think if you did the exact opposite of every creative decision made in this movie, then you'd probably wind up with a pretty good film. The dialogue is terrible, trite, and is transparently begrudging in how it has to be used as the main source of exposition with no creativity or inventiveness.
After the unity, you will join my legion, and you will know the righteousness of power.
It is so by the books. Then, when that's combined with the reluctant delivery by Affleck,
Now. Yeah, that's what that means.
It's so cool.
who clearly is not interested in being there at all. The pretty poor performance by Gal Gadot, who has, let's be honest, never been much of an actor to begin with.
Why? Because of your guilt?
Ezra Miller, who feels like he's run in from another movie, who gets more and more grating with each scene that he's in. Jason Momoa, who tries his best with what he's given, but is so glossed over that I actually forgot he was in the movie when I was writing this video.
Don't do that.
There's Ray Fisher, who probably gives the strongest performance with what he's given, but unfortunately it's completely undercut by some of the worst visual effects I've seen for a movie of this caliber. And Henry Cavill, who is now playing a completely different character to what we've seen in this universe before, because people didn't like dark, gloomy Superman, so here, have happy, glowy Superman. The great music by Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer that was set up from the last 2 Snyder films has been completely abandoned for the sake of a Danny Elfman score that is so bland and forgettable that it might as well not even be in the film. In some scenes it is mixed so quietly that you can't even hear it over the sound effects.
Senator!
Oh God, it's so horrible!
I kind of like the theme for the Flash, but it means nothing when it's used so sparsely and without proper usage in combination with the other established hero themes. When I first saw the film in the theatre, I thought it looked pretty bad, but nothing really that noteworthy. But upon rewatching it for a second time on my 4K TV, I gotta say this is easily one of the ugliest films I've ever seen. There is not a single shot that looked impressive to me. The reliance on CG for absolutely everything was so transparent and fake looking. Most of the movie is computer generated. It's basically an animated movie. Except the problem with that is that animated movies are normally drop dead gorgeous, and Justice League isn't. It has the script similar to one of the more mediocre animated DC films, so it makes sense, I guess. The actual art direction and production design is so inconsistent because of the strange post-processing they did on Snyder's original footage. They were desperately trying to add color and saturation to raw material that clearly was not filmed and lit the way they ultimately wanted it to look. The color grading is so bad at points that it actually made me laugh out loud. The intense grain and terrible choice of color had my jaw touching the floor at points. Like, Batman clearly was not supposed to look like this. He went from looking like the powerful, shadowed, cloaked figure from BVS, where he looked pretty great, to this goddamn gummy bear looking fool who is completely comical and useless. You know what, even the action, which at the very least is what you expect to be thought out and well choreographed for a film like this, is so poorly planned and fake looking. Even the Flash, who should be the most fun because of his powers, looks like a stupid dumb idiot when he runs around. Why is he moving like that? Every single one of these heroes is a discount Poundland version of something we've already seen better before. Cyborg is worse Iron Man, Aquaman is worse Thor, The Flash is worse Quicksilver, Batman is worse Batman from one film ago. And then when you get to Superman, who is so ridiculously powerful that it makes basically every other member of the team completely superfluous. Most of the film is even about how useless they are without Superman because he's so freaking ultimate.
The world needs Superman.
So they bring him back to life and he easily solves all the problems they were having. Wow, that's tense. Then we get to the villain,
Steppenwolf,
who is so bland that it actually pisses me off. He isn't a character. This guy is not a character, look at him. He's a dibby. He's just a stupid CG creature who vomits dialogue from the How to Write Superhero Villains handbook that Marvel threw into the trash 4 years ago. He's got no presence, he's not intimidating or scary. We don't care about his motivation because it's completely unrelatable and without depth or interesting explanation. Much like the rest of the film, he is pointless. All in all, Justice League ends up being one of the worst superhero films I have seen in years. A focus-tested business decision that resents the fact that the studio's poor management and vision have left it in the state that it's in. It is the film equivalent of that scene in Alien Resurrection where they stumble across the horrible manufactured clone of Ripley, who is begging to be put down because they're in such pain and misery. It tries to please everyone by being a colourful, friendly Marvel movie and ends up pleasing no one because it does nothing well. A plain and simple product. A film that comes across as so unfinished and messy that you're left wondering if Warner Bros. Accidentally released previs material instead of the finished movie. It doesn't matter how successful Wonder Woman or Suicide Squad is on their own. They aren't enough to keep this sinking ship afloat. The Justice League is supposed to be the Avengers equivalent. We're supposed to be hyped and excited for this. This is supposed to be the peak of what this franchise and characters can give us. And we get this. It's a nail in the coffin for this universe, which somehow lost even more of the non-existent integrity that BVS already flushed down the drain. Why they let Snyder take the reins again after BVS, only to spend years and hundreds of millions of dollars backpedaling, exudes such ineptitude that all I can say is that I'm glad it failed. I adore these characters on paper. I never want one of these films to be bad. I'm just glad that this film's failure reflects so poorly on the studio leadership that it will hopefully be the kick up the backside they need to take a step back and get their act together. At least the sooner this franchise fails, the faster we'll get another attempt at these beloved characters. The Lego Batman movie. Hilariously enough, the Lego Batman movie is the best Batman movie in years. It has its problems and doesn't even remotely hold a candle to the Lego movie, but still manages to be an entertaining enough animated flick. The Lego presentation allows for a unique style that adds an endlessly inventive visual flair and potential for creativity, much like the toy it's based around. So I was just editing this segment of the video and I noticed a really cool animation quirk that you might not notice unless going through frame by frame. So I know they did this in the Lego movie as well, but the animators made sure to restrict themselves to motion that Lego is actually capable of, meaning, say, a Lego leg can't bend. There isn't muscle or bone in a piece of plastic. So to create the smear frames that animation has to have for smooth-looking movement, what they actually do is they use Lego pieces. So you can see there, his leg actually morphs into 2 real Lego pieces that exist. And as this leg comes down, instead of just stretching the leg, they just place a Lego brick underneath it. And it creates the desired effect. So when you play it together, it creates a really smooth animation. It does seem to be aimed at a slightly younger audience than I was initially anticipating, with a lot of the humour being a little too immature, random and simplistic for my liking. However, the pacing is so quick that any bad jokes don't really get the chance to linger. That's not to say that the humour didn't work for me. As a big Batman and Lego fan, there is a lot to appreciate, and the majority of the time I found it pretty charming. The spin of Batman and Joker having this kind of anti-relationship was a clever twist that shows a clear understanding of the roots of the characters, which I appreciate, but at the same time twists it just enough for it to be suitably comedic and fresh. As far as the major negatives are concerned, I have a couple aside from the humour. Unlike the Lego movie, which was fully committed to absolutely everything in the universe being made out of bricks unless necessary to the plot, the Lego Batman movie is a little more flippant about it, meaning that the odd texture or particle looks realistic to like our world, and hence somewhat breaks the charming Lego visuals and style. It's not a deal breaker and it's pretty nitpicky, but it'd be nice if these Lego films had some sense of consistency as far as the visual style is concerned. My biggest problem would be the score by Lorne Balfe. A lot of it is just fine, except there is a piece that is constantly used that sounds weirdly similar to a track from Mad Max Fury Road. Like, tell me if I'm imagining this. Every time it played, I found it very distracting and it really pulled me out of the film. The Captain Underpants movie did the exact same thing by basically stealing a theme from The Incredibles. Why does nobody notice this? It's so distracting. Overall, I think Lego Batman does work more than it doesn't. There was clearly a lot of passion and understanding for how the characters are traditionally supposed to work. It's not a film for everyone, especially if you don't like Batman or Lego. But if anything I've said sounds interesting to you, then I'd probably recommend it. It's my favorite DC movie from 2017, that's for sure. Wonder Woman. I've basically nothing to say about Wonder Woman. It was so painfully average that I can barely remember anything that happened throughout its 2 hour and 20-minute runtime. I do appreciate the cultural impact it had, being the first proper female-directed and starring superhero movie, but beyond that, I found it pretty forgettable. You have to understand that I'm really not expecting or even wanting that much from a superhero movie to have a good time. As long as the action is good, the effects work and production is solid, and the acting and dialogue is okay, I can deal with the pointless MacGuffin stories they all have.
This is MacGuffin Airlines, Flight 1138.
As long as they're not too derivative, it really doesn't bug me that much. The problem is Wonder Woman doesn't particularly do any of these things that well. Sure, a lot of it is serviceable before it is bad, but also a lot of it is pretty bad. I don't know what it is about these DC movies having absolutely god-awful special effects, but a large portion of the time where CG is important to the visuals, it looks hilariously awful and cheap. I just either want to be shown something I haven't seen before, or if you are going to be derivative in some way, at least be better than what has come before it, or subvert my expectations in some way. Unfortunately, Wonder Woman does none of these things for me. It's kind of a weak porridge mix of other superhero movies we've seen years ago without any of the creativity or energy required to make it stand out. With many splashes of the extremely middling Captain America the First Avenger combined with a fish out of water nonsense from the first Thor movie, and probably one of the worst third acts I've seen in one of these superhero movies, rivaling the stupidity and headache-inducing explosions of even Batman v Superman or Man of Steel. Simply nothing is surprising or that interesting to me. The director, Patty Jenkins, excels with the character-driven interactions and relationships, which is admittedly pretty solid, and Gal Gadot looks the part, but that's simply not enough for a movie in this subgenre. It needs more. It needs some meat on the bone, on those skinny little bones. I do think the reaction to this film was a little hyperbolic, but I can at least appreciate that there is much more to like if you're able to ignore its glaring flaws, at least when compared to that of any of the other DC movies from recent years. However, to me, there is no greater crime than being so average and banal that you just become boring. And I was so constantly bored with Wonder Woman that I really cannot recommend it. Marvel, The Guardians. Man, talking about subverting expectations, this The Guardians movie is kind of a weird 180 for director James Gunn here. I guess they didn't have much confidence in it because it looks terrible. Maybe it had like a really small budget, and I don't know why everyone kind of speaks the way they do.
You were the ones who used me as a guinea pig, then you just threw me out.
What happened to Starman? What happened to the wrestler guy? Okay, obviously this isn't Guardians of the Galaxy 2. This is a different superhero movie, not made by Marvel. I was subverting your expectations there. Wasn't that clever?
You know that you need our superpowers, but you're not going to get them.
That's not for you to say, my furry friend.
But when I googled superhero movies 2017, this film I'd never heard of called The Guardians was there. At first I thought it was one of those cash grab rip-offs that always come out, like Atlantic Rim or Transmorphers, you know, that kind of thing. But it turns out this is a superhero action movie from Russia, made for what converts to about $5 million or something like that. It's really low. And with that being said, the effects work is pretty bad, but for $5 million, it's pretty decent. And I gotta say, this is one of the most entertainingly bad movies I've seen in a long time. I was consistently laughing, scream laughing throughout. It's kind of like copying Guardians of the Galaxy and the Avengers and Justice League all at the same time. It tries to do what Guardians of the Galaxy did, where you set up like a team of characters who all have their own personality and different powers and stuff, and make a team out of them. But this movie is so short, it's like an hour and a half long, and all of them have already been superheroes before.
As you might have noticed, our old team's back together.
I don't know if there have been like other entries in this series, but I don't think so. So everything's just rushed past. And it's one of the worst cases of the show don't tell rule I've ever seen. Every other minute that a character just breaks out into a monologue like, oh yeah, well, this is my past. Yeah, I've been hiding in the wilderness and now, yeah, I can turn into a bear.
Welcome, Arceus.
So the story is there's a villain who did experiments on scientists and accidentally created superpowers. And this crazy scientist man who has a weird tiny face accidentally gives himself the power to control vehicles. Like he's not like Magneto who can control metal. He can just control vehicles. Like drive tanks around and these weird CG Metal Gear looking things. And his plan is to, I don't know, destroy the world or something. Who cares?
Soon the whole world will know that I am a genius.
So I mentioned the film is Russian. So of course, it was originally filmed in Russian. So the film has this hilarious Hunt Down the Freeman tier voice acting by English people.
It's foolish to stand in the way of a deadly warrior.
That just really add to the hilarity of how terrible this is.
I found out as part of my superpowers, I don't grow old.
Like, I'm sure even in Russian, the dialogue is bad. So when you add in the fact that it's translated, it adds an extra level of bad.
I guess silence is golden.
This silence, I'd say it's priceless.
The whole thing made me think of what it's like browsing DeviantArt. Like if you stumble across some OC Avengers art or something, where everyone's made their own characters, and one can turn into a bear, and one of them can shoot rocks or whatever. It's like one of those come to life, to the big screen. We got a guy who's an earthbender from Avatar, a guy who can run really fast like the Flash, and a guy who can turn into a bear like a werewolf. And there's a girl who can only go invisible while in water. Like a really specific and kind of useless power. One hilarious thing is that this villain guy actually looks better than the villain from Justice League, which is so embarrassing for Justice League, considering it's one of the most expensive movies of all time compared to this stupid Russian $5 million garbage. The first 30 minutes are just the team coming together, and they keep referencing, oh, the gang's coming back together, this is all happening again. But then in their first fight back together, they just get their asses kicked and they're all defeated and captured. And it's like, well, you're all useless. It has some of the worst sound design I've ever heard, and this is including Search for the Worst movies.
touch of that move.
It's like they didn't use any of the original audio that was recorded or like Foley in the background. So every single sound that you hear is so artificial and just plugged in. It creates this really funny, unintentional humor. Everything's so awkward. It just feels awkward and wrong. Completely strange and unexplained things happen, like towards the end of the second act, this just old guy called the Professor shows up and everyone acts like they know him, and one character's like, oh, I thought you were dead, and they're like, nah, I'm alright.
Pardon me, Major. There's a professor here to see you. He claims that he used to work here.
Professor, this is incredible. We didn't even think you were still alive.
Ah, well.
But then, literally in the next scene, he's killed, and we're supposed to care for some reason.
Goodbye, Victor.
One of the things that really sticks in my mind is this weird shot of the villain just walking in a straight line for like 20 seconds straight. The editing is so bad. They never know when to cut, and they just cut back to things that they've already shown. It reminds me of the way I would edit YouTube videos back when I started when I was like 14. Probably the highlight of the movie is this really dramatic or melodramatic monologue by the bear guy, who's really upset that he's scared that his bear mode is gonna get him stuck permanently being a bear.
Especially when I reach the final stage of full bear mode. That brain mode's lasting longer every time. It's weird. I'm scared I could get stuck in that mode forever.
Every one of them has the most dramatic, stupidly over-the-top backstories. It reminds me of a really badly written anime or something. Like the really fast guy, just out of nowhere towards the end, is like, I had a brother once. He was way better than me all the time and was really strong, and I could never beat him in a fight. That's why I agreed to be tested on by the scientist. But then he made me too strong, so I came back and we re-fought, but the power just consumed me and I killed my brother by accident. And they're like, alright, do you want to go do your job now? And he's like, alright, and he just jumps off.
I just lost control. Then my senses came back. My brother was dead. I had beaten him to death.
The action is really slow for some reason. It's like they didn't plan any of it out at all. Probably the best thing in the movie is this bear guy, where he like walks around just as this stupid CG bear with trousers on and boots. He's like completely useless until they invent this machine gun that they strap to his back, and then he runs around punching people in the air and shooting them with a machine gun. And then he turns into a full bear that has a machine gun strapped to it, and he's running around shooting people. Then he changes back to the halfway bear transformation, and he's just randomly got boots on again. And they do this really weird thing where out of nowhere a character's just like, oh, by the way, all of the Guardians can swap powers with each other, but it's dangerous. So then they tell the Guardians, and they're like, oh, right, cool, let's join together and shoot like a beam out, and then we won. Then it ends. I think it's probably the best film I've ever seen. It's the film I recommend most out of every one of these in the list. It's the one you'll definitely, every single one of you will enjoy because it's just so hilariously bad. Sorry, I mean good. It's free on Amazon Prime for people in the UK, so watch that right now. Okay, now I'll actually go to the serious one. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians 2 is a wonderfully cheesy crowd pleaser that I enjoy immensely. James Gunn's passion for interweaving comedy into character organically creates a tone that somehow manages to still be taken seriously, at the same time as being a really effective comedy. Gunn clearly pumps so much attention and care into making sure that every character serves a purpose, that either fits into the various characters' arcs or themes, or is just there to be funny. So you're left with a Marvel movie that not only is especially kick-ass, visually impressive, bombastic, and hilarious, but has a lot more emotional resonance than even the better better Marvel movies from before it. As much as I enjoy the Avengers or the first Iron Man, they don't really make me feel anything beyond the spectacle or comedy. So Guardians 2 rises to the top compared to what has come before it in that regard. It knows just when to pull back so as to not undercut any dramatic moments, and usually knows the right amount of time to spend on a joke before briskly moving on. I'm so glad that Marvel have leaned back a bit and allowed the Guardians movies to have their own distinct identity. They knew that if you took this inherently silly material too seriously, that it could easily fall flat on its face. So they fully embraced the campy 70s inspired motif and ran with it. It distinguishes itself through lashings of colour and unique production design and some really interesting costumes and makeup. I really cannot emphasise how cartoony and fantastical these movies are over all of the others, especially compared to the Captain America movies. And that isn't a negative necessarily at all, but it is worth noting, especially considering we're going to see these worlds collide soon. And there are a couple of scenes where I had to question myself on if they went a little too far or not. It's probably mostly down to how much patience I have for seeing CG characters bouncing, jumping, and flinging around before I get tired of it. Speaking of CG, I don't normally like praising a movie by saying, "The CG was amazing," but the CG was amazing. It's that kind of CG that is still very obviously CG, but is so polished and detailed that you're just impressed by how good it ends up looking. I will say that for me, it does take a little while for it to really get going. I do prefer the first act from the original movie a little more, but the last two acts are much more satisfying in this one. There are so many memorable lines and moments to the point where if you put 10 different people who have seen this movie in a room and each asked what their favourite moment was, they'd potentially all have different answers. Dave Bautista is so charismatic and likable, and probably has the best jokes in the movie. Chris Pratt delivers another good performance as Star-Lord, and so does Bradley Cooper as Rocket. Although, out of all the Guardians, I find him to be the most inconsistent. To me, he's either really funny or massively annoying. I don't really care about Gamora very much. I wouldn't say she's particularly bad or anything, but I'm just not that invested in her character. I enjoy her arc with Star-Lord and the one with her sister that adds some much needed depth, but I really don't enjoy Nebula that much either. She's serviceable, but there's something about the delivery of her dialogue that I find off-putting. I think it's all in the performance with that one. Goddamn Doctor Who girl. Go back to Doctor Who. Kurt Russell does a really great job. He expresses his desperation and makes you understand the motivation for the things he does, even if they're not even remotely agreeable. But Michael Rooker steals the show as Yondu. They turn him from someone you kind of were indifferent about in the first movie, like he was a lot of fun, but he's not someone you really were invested in or cared about that much, into probably one of the best characters in the MCU. Sean Gunn even sneaks in a really solid performance that is worth mentioning. Honestly, just about everyone is pretty good in this movie. You can tell how much passion there was for it. As humorous as they are, I don't find that these Guardians movies make me laugh out loud. They remain charming and likable throughout, but don't get much more than a smile or light chuckle from me. I'd say that 1 out of every 5 jokes really doesn't work for me, which is fine considering how fast the pacing is and how many jokes there are, but it can still be kind of lame when you're really not feeling the humor of a scene. And once you figure out that a lot of the humor revolves around characters remarking on how ridiculous their current situation or behaviors are, then it can feel a little bit repetitive and predictable. I was also pulled out of the movie a couple of times by characters randomly going into monologues that were triggered by something kind of unrelated. It's self-aware and often played for laughs, but it shows some of the strings of Gunn's writing coming through, instead of feeling like a natural interaction. Overall, this is very high in my favourite Marvel movie list, although I have to say I did like it a lot more the second time seeing it. The jokes seemed to flow better and were somehow more surprising to me or something. The emotional core and family themes of the movie nicely carries it along to keep you invested and interested, and helps to ground the movie in something relatable around all of the crazy space mumbo jumbo. And you can clearly tell a lot of care and attention was put into making this world feel fleshed out and thoughtful despite how silly it is. I still don't really understand the powers of these characters because they all seem a little bit invincible, but I really don't care that much because everything fits within the context in which they're shown. I'd recommend this film to even people outside of the nerds who love superhero movies. It works inside and outside the MCU, standing tall as a very strong and well-written James Gunn movie above all else. It doesn't try to recapture the lightning in a bottle that the first movie was with cheap tricks and lazy writing. It builds on its characters and leaves us in a different place to where we began, which is all you can really ask for in a sequel. Spider-Man Homecoming. You know, I really wasn't that keen on Homecoming the first time I saw it. I thought it was fine, but it didn't really offer me much that I hadn't seen before already. But a weird thing happened. Upon rewatching it, I actually really enjoyed it. Once you break out of the everything has to be just like Spider-Man 2 mindset, then there is a lot to appreciate. It's not without its problems, but it does a very good job of showing us a relatively quaint and self-contained superhero story that focuses more on character interaction over the entire world coming to an end. It has one of the best villains in the entire MCU who is completely understandable in his motivations for a change, and Tom Holland is a really likable main character. Weirdly enough, for a Marvel movie, the action is kind of the worst thing about it. I wouldn't say it's bad like Justice League or Wonder Woman, but it's just not that impressive or as well choreographed compared to what we saw the same character do in Civil War. Spider-Man has such an interesting way of being able to move and fight because of his powers, so it's disappointing to me that he doesn't do anything that memorable compared to what we've seen in the past. Probably my biggest problem with the movie are the bizarre shots where Spider-Man is pointlessly completely CG, even for shots where he's not even performing anything that otherworldly or stunt heavy. The suit looks really impressive and amazing when the actor is actually wearing it with the expressive CG eyes, but you can always tell when he's completely CG and it looks kind of terrible and weightless. I'm also not sure about how I feel about the Iron Manization of Spider-Man. It does make sense in the universe considering how the suit came to be, but it does make him feel a little less special. I guess that does ultimately tie into the point of the movie, so whatever. Out of the 3 Marvel movies of 2017, it is definitely the most bland and typical Marvel in terms of its visuals. It doesn't have much style in its camera work, editing, lighting, action, or pretty bland score. The score is probably above average for one of these. There are actually some leitmotifs I remembered and noticed, as opposed to just being random orchestra noise like they often tend to be. But it's really the writing and performances that carry the movie. There's just something so compelling about watching Peter try to balance his life as Spider-Man with being a completely lame, kind of pathetic average school kid, and the two lives end up mingling with each other in some really interesting ways in this movie. I thought the opening with him filming everything like a vlog was weird and awkward and went on for way too long, but once that's over it does get much better. It probably sounds like I'm not that enthusiastic or passionate about this movie either way, and that's because I'm really not. I think it's relatively well made and solid in most areas, but for me it's lacking that certain X factor that really makes a movie like this special to me. I can see why so many people fell head over heels for this movie, but I personally prefer what the same character had to do in Civil War over what happened in this movie. With all that being said though, it's still either the best or second best Spider-Man movie, depending on your thoughts on Spider-Man 2. Maybe part of why I seem so unenthused is because we've had 3 different interpretations of this character over such a short amount of time, over like 400 million movies, which has become a little mind-numbing. But this Spider-Man is definitely the best fit for the MCU, and I hope for the sequel that it can set itself apart by either upping the presentation a bit or having a more original story. Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok is a weird one. I really dislike the first and second Thor movies. They are so bland that even referencing them is making me feel tired. But Ragnarok is kind of amazing. I don't want to oversell how good I think it is because I have some major problems with it. But wow, we actually got an extremely entertaining Thor movie. Who would have thought? We basically have one of my favorite directors, Taika Waititi, to thank for this one. His Kiwi humor and sense of style is exactly what this character needed to stand out and give, well, him a sense of character. Thor is no longer the dictionary definition of boring, pretty prince man. He has a personality and a sense of humor, and he's thrust into a situation where he actually has to problem solve and figure out a way to get out the obstacles that are holding him back. Unfortunately, the first 30 minutes of the movie are kind of dedicated to undoing the dullness of the previous 2 movies, with a strangely long sequence with Doctor Strange, which seemed a little unnecessary to me, and a death scene that lacked any impact or resonance at all. But once Thor winds up on the garbage planet, then things get a hell of a lot more interesting. Clearly heavily inspired by the 80s, much like Waititi's previous film Boy, with nods to John Carpenter, with a pretty decent synth score that embodies a sound that we haven't heard before in this universe. I'm not sure how thematically relevant the use of synth is, beyond it just sounding cool and being yet another 80s reference that pop culture is so obsessed with at the moment, but it's certainly fresh within the context of a Marvel movie. The film definitely has the most fun and is the most fun when it's on that garbage planet. The use of color is distinct and makes the decrepit landscape weirdly attractive, Jeff Goldblum is hilarious as the weird ruler, and things especially improve once the Hulk comes into the picture. I kind of think it's a massive shame that the reveal of him being in the movie was ruined by the trailers. The movie is edited as if it's supposed to be a surprise, so it's annoying that it was completely deflated by the marketing. There were memorable and stylistic decisions that actually stood out. I can very clearly picture some clever shots and even transitions that were creative and pretty much unheard of in previous Marvel movies. The film is kind of split into two perspectives, one being Thor and co. on the trash world, and the other of the villain back on Asgard, played by Cate Blanchett. The scenes on Asgard, while not particularly bad, lack the creativity and flair that the corresponding scenes with Thor have. The film even seems to be aware about how lame Asgard is, and they pretty much do everything in their power to make sure we never have to see it again after this movie. As far as the villain goes, she's okay. Blanchett is charismatic and is clearly having a lot of fun hamming it up in a cool looking outfit, but her motivations aren't particularly interesting. The information she reveals is fun to learn and is good world building, but as a character she's pretty one note. I also found her early scenes to have very little tension because of how insanely powerful she is, and mostly because I just don't care about any of the faceless drones on Asgard. Even the minor supporting characters from the previous movies are all treated like garbage and like they don't matter, because they really don't. Does anyone even know the names of any of these characters? Yeah, I thought not. Karl Urban, who I usually really like, is probably my least favorite character in the film, only really existing to be an empty slate for the villain, to have someone to monologue exposition to. He also changes motivation pretty flippantly, and only really does what he does in service of the script instead of his character, so I could do without some of his scenes. I liked how the humor, costume, and production design managed to distinguish itself from Guardians of the Galaxy. They have somewhat similar settings, but have a completely different sense of humor, visual presentation, and goal. You won't be feeling much emotion from this movie. It's visually interesting and funny, and that's definitely the focus, so you can't really criticize it too much for that. But it does lack the heart that it would need to propel it into being a truly great film, in my opinion. I think Waititi did the very best that he could with the material. It's an extremely fun, constantly engaging action comedy, and that's really all a film about Thor needs to be. It accomplished everything it needed to with a little extra New Zealand spice that will make you smile. As long as you go in with realistic expectations, I think there's a lot to like about it, and I really hope this opens more doors for Waititi, so he can continue to make amazing films like Boy or What We Do in the Shadows. Fox. Logan. I've been wanting to gush about Logan for months now, and I finally get the chance. I absolutely adore Logan. I've seen it 3 times so far, and it holds up with each viewing. Not only do I think it's the best superhero movie probably since the Avengers, but it's one of the rare genre movies that is able to break past the label of just being a great insert genre here movie, but it's just a fantastic movie all around. It wasn't until the end where it really hit me how long the X-Men, especially Wolverine, has been relevant and prevalent in movie pop culture. Logan is the nearly 2-decade-long build-up and swan song for a fan-favorite character, and is executed with such emotion that it's kind of unmatched in terms of how much investment we've had in this hairy goddamn mass murderer crazy person. We've been following this guy through thick and thin, and it's so satisfying and morose to see how it all comes to an end. Logan is miserable, depressing, vicious, violent, dark, and unrelenting, somehow without ever seeming completely hopeless. There are plenty of hopeless moments, but it never fully descends into torture porn. The violence and misery only assists to aid the tension and add weight and consequence to Logan's actions. I know there are some people who can't deal with how dark the movie gets, which I honestly completely understand, but it's not agonizing just to be exploitative or over the top. It's to highlight the tragic and heartbreaking state that our main character is in at this point in his life. It's completely in service to the story and tone and makes it really unique. The first 2/3 of the film is almost completely carried by 2 excellent standout performances by Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart. You can really tell that these actors in particular really poured their heart and soul into what will most likely be their last performance as these characters, and their passion and investment really shows. I had to commend James Mangold, the director, for having such faith in the audience, allowing for a lot of visual and interpretive storytelling that leaves a lot to the imagination. The dialogue in particular is bittersweet and wonderfully reserved, and has a lot of really memorable lines, with only a small handful of slightly awkward but necessary moments of exposition. The visuals are dark and moody, but not without style or beauty. There are plenty of memorable shots and pretty good camera work. I won't show it here, but whoever's idea the closing shot was is a genius. I totally didn't see it coming, and it sums up and concludes the film wonderfully. As far as things I didn't really like about it, there are a couple of points where the music is kind of intrusively strange, which I can't decide if I like or not, but my main gripe is with the scientist villain character. He's ultimately not very important to the overarching story. The way his story ends makes that clear. But for a film that tries its best to avoid the mistakes of lesser superhero movies from the past, he's a weak reminder that what you're watching is indeed a silly superhero movie at its core. With that being said though, I did enjoy the other villains. Boyd Holbrook was menacing and effective, and I didn't even mind the major spoiler 3, 2, 1 Logan clone. Normally that'd be something I'd roll my eyes at and whinge about with these kind of superhero movies, that they always end up just in a big fight with a villain who is just the evil version of the protagonist. But something about this one just works for me. I may be looking into this too much, but I see the clone as the physical embodiment of how Logan sees himself, a mindless, barbaric killing machine, the result of so many excruciating years of research, pain, and death. So when Logan finally sacrifices his life in an attempt to defeat the clone, it's the moment Logan finally lets go and realizes that he's not quite the monster he once thought he was. The moment he becomes the hero all the kids saw him as, completing the character's arc and beautifully wrapping up his story. The more I talk about Logan, the more I like it. It's a personal, understated story that isn't about the end of the world. It's about people living in a world that's already ended for them. It might not be as effective if you've never cared about the X-Men or seen the other movies, but I think it even works well as a standalone piece. I would recommend it to anyone who's a fan of the X-Men, superhero movies, westerns, or just sad boo-boo movies that might make you cry. There's a theory floating around that Logan may be the Unforgiven equivalent for superhero movies, but after this we may see a decline in popularity for the subgenre, just like the western. There certainly are a lot of similarities, but I'm not quite convinced we've reached critical mass yet. Only time will tell. Conclusion and the future. So those are all the superhero movies of importance. I left Captain Underpants out because it doesn't really count, and I just have nothing to say about that movie. It's fine. It's very much a movie version of the books. The end. But if I had to rank my list of best to worst of 2017, it would probably go as follows. Logan is my favorite, followed by Guardians 2, Thor Ragnarok, Spider-Man Homecoming, Lego Batman, Wonder Woman, and finally Justice League. I'm clearly a Marvel fanboy and need to kill myself, lol. Honestly, when comparing 2017 to previous years of superhero movies, the quality of these is unusually high. Marvel absolutely hit it out of the park 3 times, and Fox managed to hit one in there too. DC still have a hell of a lot of catching up to do, and I really don't see it happening until they abandon this universe they've made and try again. Or how about you just do the smart thing and go back to making standalone Batman movies? That's what we want. As far as the future is concerned, it's nearly time for the Marvel movie that has been teased for 6 years. I think as long as it develops an interesting villain that was worth the hype and the action is excellent, we'll be okay. I think Justice League has me a bit worried about a fully CG villain because it was so awful in that film. But if anyone can pull it off, it'll be Marvel at this point. We also have Ant-Man and the Wasp, which I'm pretty disinterested in, if the first movie is anything to go by. And we got Deadpool 2, which whatever, we'll see. Supposedly an Aquaman film is coming out at some point in 2018, so that'll probably be hilariously bad, or straight up cancelled. Somehow a Venom movie is actually coming out. Of course, it's not fair to write it off quite yet, but the trailer is not looking very good. I'm pretty excited for the animated Spider-Man movie. The style looks really unique. And finally, The Incredibles 2. The first movie is my favorite Pixar film, so hopefully it's not massively disappointing. This video turned out to be really fun for me to make, but it did take a stupid amount of time. But hopefully you enjoyed it and look forward to tuning in again next year for Superhero Movies 2018, because these movies are endless and they're going to keep going at least until I die, and nothing matters after I die for me, so whatever. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye. Well, hey everybody, just a quick reminder that I do a podcast with Ralph the Movie Maker and Adam from Your Movie Sucks every 2 weeks, so head over to the link in the description or the link that's about to come on screen now and you'll be in for a wicked, wild time that's all about movies and jankum. So I have it on good authority that we're going to be talking about Avengers Infinity War after that comes out, so tune in for that one. See you later.